Chapter 2 The Inner Voice. The stout 12-year-old boy swung a vibrating techno-staff in a series of coordinated movements as the lightly glowing man, wearing coveralls, threw several small blunted projectiles at him. He struck each of the clay projectiles expertly from the air and swung the vibrating device to a ready position to indicate he was prepared for another volley of the targets. The master spoke out and said, "Very good, Jacen. Now I will throw the projectiles faster than before, and I want you to try to engage the observer effect while deflecting the targets." Young Jacen nodded in acknowledgement and took up a new ready stance. His master walked many feet away until he was near the line of the forest. Turning around, he began throwing the projectiles remarkably fast in Jacen's direction. The small clay projectiles came in much quicker than before. One after the other, all were thrown with an incredible precision which caught the youngster by surprise. The harmonics of the weapon he held became slightly discordant as he flailed at the fast-moving projectiles that rocketed toward him. He was slowly driven back as his master continued to throw the clay targets at him, and one of the projectiles struck the boy in the cheek with a loud popping noise of impact. The master continued to pelt the boy but slowed down the pace of the flying targets as he spoke to his pupil. "Remember to maintain your focus, or the weapon will not cooperate with you," he called out as he lobbed a volley of the small round pellets in an arc toward his pupil. Jacen caught his breath and brought his focus under control. After a moment, the master picked up the pace of the projectiles, and Jacen was again breathing more heavily. Slowly but surely, the harmonics of the staff weapon came back into a tightly controlled resonating sound, and the young boy began gaining ground. Soon he was moving even quicker than the master, who continued to throw the small targets. Finally, the master came to a stop and said, "Good, that was excellent work, Jacen." The boy was breathing hard but recovered quickly, and the staff weapon he held in his hand stopped vibrating. Jacen looked at the weapon as his master approached and asked, "Master, why are there not more of these weapons? It would seem anyone equipped with such a weapon would be almost unstoppable." His master considered his response, then said, "Techno-weapons are powered by harmonic energy. It takes a great weapon master to craft such devices, and I only know of one man who can make them anymore. From what I can tell, he no longer makes weapons and prefers to focus on making armor only." The 12-year-old looked back at his master with 1,000 questions running through his mind. Not knowing much of his master's past, he wondered where to start and was soon overwhelmed by what he sought to understand. The master noticed his pupil's consternation and said, "Jacen, always remember there will be things you do not know. The best advice I can give to you is to seek understanding, but without the need to control that understanding. By this way, you will always keep a focused and flexible mind." Later that day, the two hooked up their pack mule to a small cart and walked away from the farm on the dirt road that led through the forest toward the growers' village some miles to the east. Jacen looked around the forest as they traveled and noted how calm his master was. The glowing man was using his staff weapon as a walking stick while he hummed some light melody. As they walked, the boy asked, "Master, why do you sing like that?" His master paused, then said, "It helps me feel better," and winked at his pupil before returning his gaze to the road in front of them. Jacen smiled at his master's easy way and found himself relaxing as they walked upon the road. The whispers he would always hear were silent as they walked. Several minutes later, they arrived at the outskirts of the growers' village and began walking along the row of the market square to trade their wares for other vegetables and fruits. Many people walked among the stalls, and his master's apples were always a huge success. They had soon traded the fruits for other supplies, and the master told Jacen to run over to the mercantile station and check if any of the special salts they had ordered at their last visit had arrived. Jacen nodded and moved off to follow through. As he walked, he looked around the village and noticed several other children his own age running around a tree and chasing each other as they laughed. As he watched the children play, he felt something in his chest yearn to join them, when suddenly the whispers began to creep into his mind. "The old man will spare no expense to touch you," came one whisper. "Take her purse! Take her purse! She will never know!" came another. Just then, a horrible, deep voice he had never heard before spoke within his mind. "Kill them. Kill them all. uttered the voice. It was as if the new voice was roaring within his mind, and he could hear nothing else. Jacen grabbed the sides of his head and turned away from the scene of the laughing children. He staggered into an alley as he fought against waves of nausea at the horrific scenes of murder that were forced through his mind against his will. The dark voice within his mind was laughing as he staggered. As he held his head in within his hands, he looked up and saw the shape of the full moon high in the afternoon sky. The dark voice roared within his mind as he looked upon the orb. Just then, several boys that were 2 or 3 years older than him entered the alley. Jacen did not notice them and continued leaning against the wall of the building within the alley, staring up at the moon. "Look, look, a leaning dwarf," said a scraggly boy who was dirty and wearing coveralls. Several of the other boys chuckled, and as a group they all moved toward Jacen. "Kill them," slithered the deep voice within his mind, and he looked up just as the scraggly older boy pushed him. Jacen's training instinctively took over, and he grabbed the boy's outstretched arm as he was pushed back. As he fell, he used the energy of his attacker and simultaneously twisted so that the other boy was spun from his feet. The 2 boys went down with a huff, and the scraggly boy yelled out as his face struck the dirt ground. Jacen leapt up from where he landed and spun around to face the other boys. The other 2 boys ran at Jacen with menace in their eyes, and Jacen screamed a savage battle cry and began running directly at them. The older boys were stymied by the loud shout and were suddenly less certain of their actions as the screaming younger boy ran at them. Jacen found himself among the boys and kicked out with a precise frontal spin attack with his dominant foot. His blow caught one of the bullies in the face with a loud sound of impact and spun the older boy from his feet. The other boy rushed in and grabbed Jacen from behind. Jacen used the nearby wall to run up and spin over the other boy, which broke the boy's grasp. He landed lightly and swept the other boy from his feet with a spinning leg sweep from behind. He swirled to an attack stance. The bullies were all shakily getting to their feet when Jacen let out another howl of attack and began to work his way toward the boys. Just then a loud command came from the nearby opening to the alley. "Stop!" boomed a loud voice. A harmonics of blast of noise washed over the group of boys, and Jacen was physically pushed from behind by the force of the words. He spun around with clenched fists and saw that it was his master. Slowly he unclenched his fist as the lightly glowing man walked over to him with a stern expression on his face. He approached Jacen and looked at him with his piercing, mildly glowing eyes, then looked at the bullies and waved his hand at them, saying, "Get out of here, now!" The power of his voice pushed out again, and the bullies scattered in the opposite direction as the master turned back toward his pupil. He looked at the boy who was looking down at the ground. After a moment, the man placed his hand upon the pupil's shoulder and gently moved them away from the scene. Later that evening, back at their farm, Jacen sobbed quietly to himself as he lay in his room upon his small cot. He was replaying the scene over and over in his mind from the violent event that had transpired earlier in the day. He had not wanted to fight anyone and had just been defending himself. He also thought of the strange longing he had felt when he watched the other children playing and had wanted to belong so much. Instead, he felt so alone, and the feeling of loneliness was too much to bear. He did not hear the master enter his room in their small cabin and did not move when the man placed his hand upon his back in a gentle way. Tears continued to run down the boy's face as the master began to quietly sing a song of healing. Jacen was caught up by the beauty of the song and soon fell silent. As his master finished the song, he continued to hum the enchanting melody and gently pressed on several pressure points on Jacen's back. The effect was soothing, and Jacen fell into a deep sleep. Late in the night, he awoke to the sound of a voice calling out to him. My boy, where are you?" he heard the voice say within his mind. He recognized the voice as the same that called out to him from time to time when he took the compost droppings to the pile in the forest. He secretly had come to think of the voice as his favorite. The feminine voice giggled in his mind as he thought this and spoke again. My boy, there is a pool in the forest a short way from your cabin. Go to the pool so we can visit together. Hurry now, my sweet boy, came the voice. The 12-year-old was intrigued and quietly let himself out of his room. He walked as quietly as he could, making sure he did not make too much noise to disturb his master, who was within his own room across a short hallway. Jacen glanced at the door to his master's room and could see a small light emanating from beneath the frame of wood. He could hear his master murmuring quietly in an unknown language and knew the man was awake. The boy quietly made his way across the floor and grabbed his nighttime tunic as he let himself out of the cabin. It was still dark outside, but the full moon was in the sky and provided enough light to see by. He placed the tunic over his stout frame. The air was chilly, but he was used to this, and set off toward the forest beyond the clearing near their farm. As he entered the forest, he became aware of the usual whispers within his mind. Some were saying words he understood, while others spoke in a language he did not.
"Ignore those other voices, my boy. Come, keep looking for our pool,"
came his favorite voice. After some minutes of looking around the forest near the compost pile, Jacen finally noticed a small pool of water that had gathered between several large stones. He approached the pool and saw it was formed by one of the many springs that came up from the forest floor from time to time. A shaft of moonlight gently touched the surface of the pool, and as he looked down upon the water, his favorite voice suddenly became much clearer.
"My boy, you found it! We will have so much fun together, my sweet boy,"
came the voice inside his mind. Jacen was amazed, for the voice was so clear, it was almost as if there was someone standing right next to him.
"Who are you?" "A friend, came the voice.
"Why can't I see you?" he asked.
"You will, I promise, yes," she responded.
The boy smiled, and suddenly did not feel as alone as he did before.